Dr. Johannes Malherbe, it's good to have you here in the SAT students, finally. And by the way, it took me about how many years? 2.5 years just to get you into the studio, so welcome.
Thank you, Rudolph.
It's good to have you here, and I think a lot of students have seen you, they notice you, but they don't really know where you come from and what you're doing at SATs. Maybe you want to tell them a little bit what you do at SATs, and especially with the topic today, why are we discussing children specifically?
Yeah, Rudolph, I'm originally from the Western Cape, so that was my world until I didn't leave what's now the Western Province before finishing high school, so that was really my world. But yeah, I studied there, primary school, and went to university, Stellenbosch. I trained as a pastor, and my first parish was in the Western Cape, a rural community. A few other things I did in the meantime, we might get there. But yeah, for the last 8 years or so, I'm with SATS. So after serving as a pastor, I've also been with Petra Institute and with Africa School of Mission. So here we are, and my main responsibilities would be Old Testament, children, and then also something with innovation at SATS.
That's incredible. Yeah, I think that's quite a diverse, perspective that you've given there. You seem to be very passionate about children and children's ministry. Why is that?
Have you met my grandson?
No.
No, I think that's in God's, just His plan, so that when we see life start again, I don't think you can't blame anyone for getting excited. And my children were cute when they were young, so that already was a first one, but it's even deeper when there's a third generation. Their joy, their openness, and just anything goes, and so I see that as normal.
Yeah, for sure. And it seems like in some instances we expect, especially in church ministry, that some people should be passionate about it because maybe they've got kids and they don't have an option. Who's going to sit in children's church but moms? But is it something that is deeply cultivated, or is it something that we are more intentional about and we do, even if it's an act against your will, to participate in children's ministry?
Once at church, a guy was preaching at the church where I worship, and I don't know how it came, we had a discussion, and then he gave this sentence. He said, "I don't do short people."
Oof. Sure.
And so that's your question. And obviously I wanted to debate him. So let me rephrase your question. Is it really, as I said, natural for adults and for men in particular, and pastors then, to love children and to be able to relate to them? And apparently not. And have a look at my own story. I regret the fact that it had to be something that was discovered, something that changed. So I didn't have a model for that in our theological training.
Yes.
Children were not in the focus, and also the models you had of ministry. So it's something, I love the word discovery, something that you discover. You don't create it. It was there, but you just didn't see it. And I think God needs to open our eyes to discover His perspective and just the beauty and the value of children. So yes, I think there's a conversion of some sort. People need to open their eyes and discover and see this is real, this is future, this is life, and then a lot of things happen.
Yeah, how do you feel about children in Africa, in African society? Do you think that we are cultivating a world that is fit for children?
I think it depends who you talk to. If you talk to people in the development welfare sector, they need to show just the desperate state. But I think we need to be honest and to say there are a lot of good things around children in Africa. If you look at changes in health, welfare, medical care over the last few decades, if you look at education improvements happening there, poverty levels, those are all positive. So there are many positive things on the continent. By the way, it's the continent with the highest number of children in the world, and also the highest percentage. So it's a young continent.
Sure.
And if we look at children from that perspective, there's a lot of potential and promise. The other side of the coin, I checked again just before this interview, the State of the World's Children, issued annually by UNICEF. If you look at, it's generally agreed that under 5 mortality is a very good gauge of the state of children in any nation or any community. The top 21 nations in terms of the highest infant mortality, under 5 mortality rate, are all from Africa.
Wow.
So I need to say that again. Out of almost 200 nations in the world, the nations with the highest, where children, the highest number and percentage die before their 5th birthday,
Sure.
21, the highest, are all African. Then you've got 3 others. So there's still a lot to do. So generally, there are things that one could get excited about,
Sure.
but there's still a lot to do in the African continent. I don't think it's a continent fit for children yet.
Sure. You wrote a book called Saved by the Line. And could you maybe tell us a little bit more about the intention and also the message of this book?
While working with Petra Institute, I had the privilege to travel quite a bit. And it struck me that at conferences where children were in focus, I found foreigners there, attending, arranging the meetings, being the top speakers. And it felt like a show. How is it possible that in Africa, the people who talk about children and who invent the plans, run it, and who are the heroes of those stories are all people from outside? So the book was actually written in protest to say, this cannot be. It cannot be that the whole sector of child care is delegated and handed over to foreigners. So it was an appeal for affirming what is happening in African society, the good work done by mothers and fathers, by communities, by churches, and to stop this story that Mama Africa is not able to care for her own children. So it was sort of a negative and a wake-up call message, and I got some pushback, especially from people in the development sector. Also protesting that huge amounts of money are paid over to institutions who are supposed to be the saviors. That's where the title comes from.
Yeah.
But who eat up a lot of the money.
Sure.
So it's questioning what we do with Africa's children.
That's incredible. When you look at the church, especially in Africa, are we prone to be orientated towards children, and are we part of the problem or the solution in general?
You know, the church in Africa is huge and it's diverse, so there won't be a simple answer. But let me start. I identify with pastors and with leaders. So I would rephrase that question to ask, like the disciples of Jesus, is there a godly understanding, a divine perspective on childhood? And do the church leadership prioritize children? And I would say, unfortunately, often not. So yes, we've got mega churches with huge and very impressive children's ministries, but generally, I think the church still has a lot to do, and it is a shocking reality that church leaders are sometimes involved in child abuse. Those things hit headlines world over, but it's in Africa as well. So I don't think the church can claim to do much better than society in general, and that is something we need to address.
Yeah, and let me just say, as I pastored in an area that was quite poor, and in some of those churches, there's no budget, there's no vision. You know, some churches talk vision, but the children are never included in that. And I can remember one day we spoke out against the fact that, hey, the children's church is outgrowing the church. Maybe the church should move into the classrooms and the children should move into the church, you know, tongue in cheek. But it was actually quite amazing to see that there was a pushback against, we're never going to serve that because that's not the priority. And unfortunately, a lot of people, you know, again, have that perception. What would you say to individuals that are, you know, interested in ministering to children? What is the benefit of that? What are some of the characteristics and some of the positives that we can receive? Because we're not only giving to children, in the end, they are providing for us as well. They minister back to us. Most people, my wife, that is involved in children's church, the reason she gives for being involved in children's church is because she always gets something from the kids. How would you speak to the church? How would you say and speak to them and motivate them to look at this more from that foundation?
Let's just first celebrate what you've shared now, because what you've highlighted is the fact that if we do our engagement with children, or children's ministry as it used to be called, if we do that right, it's a growth area for the church. And it's a simple truth. So
It is.
if children want to come to church,
Sure.
they sometimes they can't walk or they need to be brought there, and immediately you draw the attention of the community. So that already is a huge plus. And as you say, your wife observed that it's fulfilling to her to engage with children. So those are two very important points. So yes, if you ask, let me give this quote. John Westeroff, he spoke about ministry to and with and for children. So those, if we understand that it's not only downloading, but it's also ministry with and ministry for. I'd love to add a fourth one there, ministry by children. Because children also are ministers. When they know the Lord, they carry a witness with them into their friendships, into where they go. So if our eyes are open to children, ministry for them, but also to them and by them, there's no end to where the witness can go.
What do you regard as the heart or the foundation of Christian child engagement?
The term itself, Christian child engagement, that says a lot. So what changed in my own case and what I'd love to see with others is to try to see children the way God does. And for that you need to study Scripture. So there's an arrogant assumptions in adults that we are better, and kids are growing up to become as smart as we are. And we carry that into our theology, that we believe we, these spiritual giants, and these kids are little pigans playing around, and one day they will be where we are. And if you study Scripture and you spend time with God on this, to me, the revolution happened when I questioned that. When I said, why would God be more interested in what happens between me and adults than between me as pastor and kids? So if one challenges your own assumptions and your arrogance, that changes. And if you look at Deuteronomy, for example, in 8 places, God lumps together orphans, foreigners, and widows as the ones who need special care. That's just the heart of God revealed right there in Deuteronomy. When Jesus, where there was this debate about who's the greatest, he invites a kid into their midst. So there's a revolutionary opening up, revelation of saying, don't assume that there's any link between body size and your spirit. Sure. And often these things are different. So the humility of a child, the openness to the things of God, the awe, the wonder. So I believe it starts when that conversion happens, when our heart, our spirits open to see that every child is important to God. It doesn't matter the age or the experience.
You mentioned earlier that really when we look at child engagement, it starts with the family. And it starts with the family structure. What would your advice be to parents that feel they don't know how to answer kids when they ask questions, and they don't have the simplicity almost to explain difficult topics of discussion, and then they don't say anything at all, and the child must sort of stumble on its own way. What would your encouragement be to parents?
Let me start from the wrong end. I learned it late with my kids not to answer their questions. So I'll explain what I mean.
Okay.
So, because what I discovered is often the person who asks a question has a lot of experience, spend a lot of time with it, and especially children. Yes. So sometimes they ask a question that's so profound, I don't want to spoil it with my answer. Sure. It's not about your knowledge. It's about affirming your child. It's about building the relationship. So your question is, how do we encourage parents? If they understand how rare this has become, a loving couple, a mom and dad, and a godly atmosphere in the family. It's almost outdated. But if you can cultivate that, and you can enjoy children's questions, and you also admit that you don't know, that is a lesson in itself. It's your humility. So you're not the super dad or the super mom who knows everything. You're interested in the relationship, in just the journey of discovery. God, after all, didn't give us an encyclopedia about himself. He invited us into a relationship. And if we can take our kids into that journey of discovery, they grow with us. So we don't need to be super. We don't need to be these intellectual giants. We simply need to be honest, open, humble. when I grew up, it was not fashionable for adults to admit mistakes, especially not to their own kids. I think we need to change that, because we do mess up, we do sin.
And they see it.
And they see it, they know. And
Yeah,
if you
for
then show them, when I apologized to my son for doing something to him that I was ashamed of, that I felt wasn't good, he was so ready to forgive me. So something of the sacrament happens there. So I would say just use ordinary life, the meals, the joys, the sorrows of just normal family, to invite God into that space. So it's not a school that you need to pass the exams. It's a journey to enjoy. And your kids would associate that with pleasant times, as a family, with God as part of that.
That's amazing. Well, one of the places that we can talk about is, you've just mentioned schools, but what about schools? What opportunities do you see there for Christian child engagement?
You know, if you go back in history, you love that, but education started with the church. So the church, through all ages, if you look at the book of Proverbs, it goes back to that time. So education was done by the people of God, because they understood that this is where children learn. And generally, churches have abdicated, have just released education and said governments or the teachers need to take that over. So there's a huge opportunity for churches to get back into any level of education, whether you do sport or after school, or whether you start a school. Many churches, they have the facilities, they use it on weekends. It's ideal for a school. So if we don't do that just for fundraising and for the kids, of parents who can pay, if we use that as something that builds into the community. So I would say schools are the most fertile ground for Christian involvement, not only to the children of members, but as a service to a community.
That's amazing. Well, if we look at Children's Church, I think we've mentioned that some churches might feel a little bit overwhelmed, or they might not know what model they need to follow in their given context. Can you maybe discuss some models and maybe how some pastors can maybe find a model that suits them and their community where they are at?
I love the plural model, so that we don't think in terms of people who do it right and others who don't, because we're all experimenting and life changes. If you just think how COVID has changed almost all forms of ministry, so we again on a road of discovery. I would say there are two basic approaches, and both have their place. So the one would be one of giving specialized ministry to the children. So you would take them out of the main service, you would have certain services geared to their level of understanding and their preferences. So this is very popular, especially in the Western world and in your more charismatic or macro churches, because they do have the resources, and often they invest a lot in what they would call children's church. So that's the one approach. The other one that you would find in cell churches, home churches, smaller churches, and less resourced, would be to integrate, and that's where my passion is. So, because what is there in the church that a child cannot understand or cannot participate in? Worship, prayer, just average services, excitement, wisdom they bring, revelation. So if you're, I don't want to say right or wrong, so there are good points in both of those, but I would challenge maybe those who listen to us to say you don't need to build an auditorium for the children of the community. Rather think, what are the best ways to involve them in what you do? And that intergenerational ministry is a huge growth area, and I think we need to learn. Like weddings or funerals or Christmas, you don't do them separately for this or that. You include them. At home, when you do cell church, I think it would be sad if children are sent out to watch a video, do something else. Try to change the topic, the style, so that, when there's food, when there's play, when there's music, kids are in. They want to be there. So just think in terms of what could be done to make your church child-friendly. Include them. And their churches are leading in this area. Ask those pastors or ask their leaders, what do you do? I'll close this just with one comment. We used to model the formal education and to think that Sunday school is, and then we have classes and exams. And I don't think this is the route the church should take. It's not about intellect only. It's not about knowledge and exams. It's about relationships and growing in trusting God and being a witness. So I think the future is in integration, is in intergenerational ministry, and I'm very excited about possibilities I see there.
That is such good advice, and I think that pastors can welcome that. I always said in our church, I said, you know what, allow the kids to come to church, because when they're older, they might not want to come to church, and then we wonder why, because all of the years we just said, shut up, don't do this, don't do that, no, don't. And I can remember in one of the services, there was this little young boy. I had a pulpit on wheels. He climbed into the pulpit and he started kicking the pulpit, and he was off with the pulpit on wheels. And some of the elders were distracted by it and actually wanting to confront the kids. And I said, leave them. I said, I want that in church, because, I want to show the kids that it is okay. Okay, not all of them misbehaved. And we were always so proud of the kids, because in our church, there were children that sat there for 2-3 hours and they didn't move, nor peep, so they were very disciplined. But I think that the idea of integrating children into the community and in the church will also challenge the pastor. Maybe when he preached, to do something that appeals to the children.
Now let me just, because I'm afraid you would move away from this excellent point that you raised. So by modeling child-friendly behavior, by affirming children, by signaling, sending this message, you're okay, I like you, I can meet you at your playful level, that is ministry. That shows your church a different way of doing. And I've seen the opposite. I've seen pastors demonstrating their power and being very, very harsh in their dealing with kids. So I want to affirm what you've done and say you might not realize how deep this is. And let me give one example from the church I was leading. When there's pregnancy out of wedlock, it's as if all the church structures jump into action, and now they want to discipline. And the mother, and we understand where this comes from, but just look at it from the perspective of the child. So if as pastor you would move into a space of welcoming God in that space. Think of the models Jesus gave us of moving into spaces where people would want to throw stones and kill, where he took the kingdom of God into that space, even where there are things that we are ashamed of. But then as pastor, you welcome that child, you minister God's love and presence there. And this is the model that I just love the story that you shared.
Yeah, I think in our churches, I love what my wife shared with me one Sunday. She said, she taught the kids to sing Amazing Grace. And then they go into the big church, and then it seems like the elders decide who gets it, amongst the kids. And, but some of these kids, especially from an African context, they are confronted with a lot of things which we don't always understand. But how can we be more compassionate? How can we be more attuned to the need of those kids in our contexts, and be sensitive to them as members of our church? Because a lot of time I think pastors don't even count the kids. They'll say, we had 13 adults in the church service on Sunday, but there were 50 kids in the children's church. That should get us excited, but they don't even count them. It's just like all about the adults. How can we be more compassionate towards children?
Let me answer again with a little anecdote. I was serving as a pastor for just over 7 years. And then a lady, when we greeted and we said our goodbyes, one lady came to me and said, Pastor, the guys who were alcoholics when you started are still alcoholics. The men who beat their wives are still beating their wives. Wouldn't you have helped us more if you gave a little bit more attention to the children and you showed them a different way? And if you knew this woman as I did, she wasn't critical, she wasn't attacking me, but something dropped into my spirit that some people are hardened in the life choices they've made. So your question is, how do we do it differently? I see no other way than connecting with the children themselves. And if you know a child by name as a pastor, for you it might be one of 100 kids, but for that child it's the only pastor.
Yeah, you're right.
And that will change her understanding of life in church. So if we prioritize the children and we build relationships with a few children, we see them at home, we see them at school or in the community, And if you cherish, cultivate, develop those relationships, they will come back, and maybe you get a better farewell than I received because God opened your eyes to say, and it's not that we didn't focus on children, it's just that there was so much more to do in terms of priority and building relationships and focusing on individuals, not the whole school or the whole church, but on a personal level, that a child would say, my pastor knows me, he loves me, I want to go to him, I want to meet him. So that will change it.
That's incredible. That is so encouraging to hear. I can remember one morning we woke up and there was a scuffling at our front door, and there was a little girl that was severely abused for a long time by her parents. And that night she slept in front of our house because she felt safe there at our house. And it was really touching because obviously we invited in and obviously we worked from there. But I realized there that that was the only safe environment she had.
Yeah.
She didn't want to impugn on she didn't want to even knock on the door, but she felt safe at the house. And obviously we invited her in. But you recently wrote an article on Christian child advocacy. And I just wanted to ask you what it means when you write or speak about that term. And then what was your central appeal through the article?
Again, you say such powerful things, so I want to hold your question and just respond to that. Jesus invited a child to come to him in Matthew 18. I want to believe that Jesus knew that child. Because if a lot of men together, adult company, and a foreign man would call a kid and say, come here, he would never go there.
Yes.
So the fact that that child comes, so the fact that that girl came to your front door means there was a message, you're safe here. You are welcome here. So the way that Jesus, I believe he knew that child. The child was part of the discipleship group, as in your church.
Yes.
And that little girl felt, God is here for me at this pastor's house. And so may God use us to build those relationships. Rudolph, you ask about Christian child advocacy. An advocate is someone who speaks out on behalf of someone else. And the Greek word for the Holy Spirit we used is also the comforter, but some would say the advocate. So Jesus, in a sense, advocated, showed a different way, as it is from your example. So Christian leaders often have influence, and they can use that when decisions are taken in a community about schools, about recreation centers, about what they do, the criminal justice system, about welfare. So an advocate is someone who is present and who has information and who uses his or her influence in that situation on behalf of children. And I believe since we are on a continent where children's needs are so huge, Christian leaders need to use their influence as advocates. It doesn't mean they need to deliver all the services needed. They can't. But they can use power from the highest political level to just every day to the neighbors. You can walk across, you can hear that child is beaten now. And an advocate would move there and say, can I help? So you don't just call the police or just gossip. You step into a situation from the smallest to the biggest, and you use that influence God gives you, but also the knowledge and also the skills of how to communicate that. And you speak out. You bring God's light and His truth in that situation. This is what we mean by Christian child advocacy.
That's amazing. Dr. Johannes, if you can speak to pastors right now and tell them something about their priority of being involved in their children's church and ministry, what would you do and what would you say?
I would take this apple and this peach. By the way, you may take it when we go. So I would ask them, why would a tree grow this fruit? The tree cannot eat it. The tree has no benefit. It needs to add all the sugar and nutrients inside. Why would it grow this? And you know the answer, but let me show you. The peach grows it because it wants us humans to do children's ministry, to take the seed and to plant it elsewhere. So the tree is worried about its young, about the next generation. The apple, I have to show you, it's the apple seed. Apple has normally 5 seeds. It's so small you might not even be able to see it.
Yes.
But the apple, some say that was the fruit in the garden in Eden. We don't know. But the apple produces this fruit to make sure that there's a next generation.
Sure.
So, dear pastors, if I may say, next time you eat fruit, you ask yourself, where is the seed?
Mm.
And what is my purpose? So, as a pastor, this is our task.
Amen.
We do a lot of preaching, we do a lot of other stuff, but remember, there's a seed that has the potential of another generation. That's the hope for the future. That's
Amen.
where we're going. And as a pastor, you can't delegate that. As a parent, as a grandparent, I can't let others raise my kids. So Jesus said, let the children come to me. And he spoke to the pastors, he spoke to the disciples, the apostles. And he said, it's your job. Let them come to me. So take care of the seeds. Eat the apples, do all the other stuff you want. But it's actually about the seed.
Amen. Well, thank you so much for that. That will leave an everlasting picture with me. I'm going to never eat an apple or an apricot the same way. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Rudolph.